You are controlling the screen. It's that one. Now it's the camera or yes. Should we start? Oh, 5 minutes. Last 5 minutes. Excellencies, dear. Sorry. Excellencies, dear delegates, dear attendees, welcome to this side event, to the 56th session of the Human Rights Council convened by FIAN International. FIAN International is an international human rights organization working for the right to food and nutrition. This event is co-sponsored by the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food System, known as IPES Food, the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, La Via Campesina, Katarungan, and CETIM. I'm Diana Rizzolio, the coordinator of the UNEP-led Geneva Environment Network. I will have the pleasure to moderate this session. We are joined this afternoon by leading experts to discuss the importance of tackling land inequality to advance climate justice and a just transition. This event aims to contribute to emerging discussions about the best ways to address land concentration and inequality. I will be introducing the speakers as I will be giving them the floor. But in the preamble of this event, I would like to emphasize that land and other natural resources are disrupted resources, and their distribution is an indicator for structural inequalities, discrimination, and marginalization in societies. Historical phases of enclosures and dispossession have concentrated control over natural resources in the hands of powerful actors, generating domination, exclusion, and exploitation, including in the context of colonialism and occupation. In recent decades, a complex web of factors has led to land rushes, large-scale land acquisitions and speculations, this with massive dispossession and new levels of land concentration around the world. Land and other natural resources are central to tackling the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. The demand for raw materials needed for the energy transition, offsetting markets, and land-based conservation have led to green land grabs. However, the promotion of equitable tenure rights for people and communities is crucial for sustainable management and use of ecosystems. Redistributed agrarian reform policies have long been a key demand of social movements and organizations representing rural people, and we have some of them with us today on this panel. The International Conference on Agrarian Reform and Rural Development that took place in Brazil in 2006 marked a milestone at the United Nations level to turn away from market-based land policies that had been promoted for many years. However, with the advent of land grabbing, the focus of many actors in land policy circles shifted from a proactive agenda which focused on ensuring broad, equitable, and secure access to land for landless to more defensive approaches. As we will hear today, new data has revealed that land concentration has steadily increased over the past decades. Consequently, the issue is slowly returning to the agenda, and concerns about land inequality have started featuring in policy discussions again. However, appropriate policy responses are still largely absent. We have on the panel today the permanent representative of Colombia, a country actively trying to redistribute and return land to dispossessed rural communities. The Colombian government has, for example, recently announced its intention to host the second International Conference on Agrarian Reform and Rural Development in 2026. It is also important maybe to mention here that Colombia will host the 16th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity this year, at the end of this year. And various meetings in preparation of this major UN conference have also addressed land rights of communities. The renewed attention on land concentration calls for imagining new approaches to agrarian reform within broader discussions about wealth distribution and just transitions. So now let's hear from our panelists, the real experts, about this thematic. So the first part of our event today will set up, within this first part, we will be setting up the scene on dynamics around the land grabbing and land concentration. And we will start the discussion with Sofia Monsalve Suarez, who is the Secretary General of FIAN International. And Ms. Monsalve is also a member of IPES Food, the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, one of the co-sponsors of this event. She will present the key findings of a recent IPES food report, which is entitled Land Squeeze, What is Driving Unprecedented Pressures on Farmlands and What Can Be Done to Achieve Equitable Access to Land. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chairperson, and good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining our side event today. As announced, I will be presenting the key insights of one of our latest report called the Land Squeeze. So far, there is a lot of attention about food systems transformation in the context of climate change and the ecological crisis that we live, but there is very little attention to the fact that small-scale food producers, whether indigenous peoples, peasants, fisherfolk, pastoralists, are facing a land squeeze. I think one of the key messages of this report is that we are risking a tipping point for smallholder agriculture because they are controlling less and less land. And we will present this pressure on farmland is on worldwide scale, and it is impacting in several forms. Food insecurity is one major form, but also on rural poverty and on ecological destruction itself. So it is a complex, a multidimensional land squeeze. Land degradation is playing an extremely important role in this land squeeze, but land concentration of the ownership and access of land as well. So our report will now I will concentrate on presenting the four main drivers of this land squeeze. And we start presenting the latest data on land concentration worldwide. You can see there that 1% of farms control 70% of farmland worldwide, so which is an incredible concentration of farmland globally. And then you can see in the different regions of the world what are the figures. I think it is important to state that the data is very limited, is outdated, and in that sense, we very much welcome the report that the FAO, in collaboration with several UN agencies, including the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, is preparing for next year, and it will give us a more updated picture in terms of the concentration of land. So back to the four drivers that I mentioned. Here you see an overview of these drivers. So what is driving land inequality worldwide? The first one to mention, the next slide please, is what we call land grabbing 2.0, which is the financialization of land, considering land as a financial asset. And this has been driven by the regulation of land markets, by the passing of many pro-investor policies, which make possible that, for instance, agricultural investment funds have rose tenfold from 2005 until 2018. And that agricultural commodity traders speculate in farmland through their own private equity subsidiaries. So land price inflation has been reported in all regions of the world, and particularly in Europe, it has tripled, but it has doubled almost global. So this is one first important factor, the financialization of land markets. A second one You can see the next slide. Yes, the second one is what we call the food system reconfiguration. These 70% of global farmlands are under industrial agriculture. And this system is consolidating in the entire world. It is heavily reliant on capital. It's capital intensive, it's technocentric, and it's also fossil fuel intensive because of the agrochemical inputs that are required for industrial agriculture. So we see an extreme concentration across in whatever part of the supply chain you take, or the food system part you take. There is concentration in agricultural inputs, in commercial seeds, in grain traders, but also in retailing. And this concentration is also happening through vertical integration. And now with the digitalization of agriculture, we see also deals between these large oligopoly structures in agriculture with big tech. So this is the second driver. So it is impossible for small scale food producers to survive economically in such an environment. Well, the third factor that we highlight, particularly in the report, is about green grabs. And it is the fact that through the international environmental agreements, there are goals related to land-based conservation, for instance, or to carbon removal or carbon offsets. So this is creating also an enormous pressure because it's also combined with financialization. Many of these carbon markets projects are being made possible through an enormous influx of financial capital in these new emerging markets. And it is interesting to see, for instance, that 20% of the documented land deals in the Land Matrix Initiative, which is an initiative to track land deals, go back to these new green grabs, which is an indicator of how fast this sector is expanding. So in the report, we go into all the details of the different targets and how they are impacting. And in fact, these non-regulated carbon markets, particularly the voluntary carbon markets, are creating really many problems of threatening to indigenous peoples are losing their control over their territories, or is creating a lot of conflict inside communities because parts of the community want to enter into the benefits of these markets and others don't want. And it has become so difficult that the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples' Rights has called for a moratorium on carbon markets on indigenous lands. The next slide, please. The last factor that we highlight in the report is the expansion and encroachment due to other extractive industries like mining, for instance, but also urbanization, industrialization, and infrastructure necessary for global trade of all these commodities is also affecting enormously the availability and access of land of small-scale food producers. So these are the four factors that we identify, which are combined. And again, what we would like to highlight in this side event is the fact that land inequality is very connected to the ecological destruction, and therefore environmental policies, climate policies, which are not addressing land inequality, are risking to become ineffective and not addressing the structural factors of ecological destruction. So the message is to really take on board the redistribution agenda also for climate policies, because it is very clear that indigenous peoples, peasant communities, fisherfolk, artisanal fisherfolk are actually safeguarding biodiversity and other natural resources. So some last remarks on the way forward. We think that the right to land, as it has been recognized in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, for Indigenous peoples, but also in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, have to be at the center of the Rio Conventions, so that communities have their own governance systems over natural resources, that democratic spatial planning, reconciling different needs for energy, for transition, but also for food are in place, and that community-led conservation measures have to be more important than ever. We also need to get speculative capital out of land markets. So in that sense, a cap on farmland investments may be a necessary measure. We also need to, well, prioritize, as I said, non-market mechanisms for carbon offsets. And finally, we need a new generation of land and agrarian reform where the agroecological transition, but the redistribution and the protection of the environment are at the center. So these are the key messages of our report, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Masalve. I think the problems we are facing are clearly identified in this report and in your presentation, as well as the leverage points for change. And indeed, the three Rio conventions, the meetings of the parties are meeting all at the end of this year, and it's important milestones where those problems need to be addressed. So next, we will hear now from Mr. Zainal Fuad Arfin, who is from the Serikat Petani Indonesian Peasant Union, a member of La Via Campesina, and it's a video message that will be screened by our colleagues from FIAN.
Delegates, member of states and civil societies, delegates, member of states and civil societies from La Via Campesina, a global peasant movement comprising 180 peasant and organizations in 81 countries. We express our attitude to the measure of this comprehensive, real, integrated, popular, and genuine agrarian reform is one of these crucial struggles that we need to continue. In the genesis of the UN Declaration of Rights of Peasants and of the People working in rural area of UNDROP, we have said that the one of the underlying causes of the agrarian conflict, discrimination, and the vulnerability of peasants and other people working in rural area was the absence of agrarian reform and rural development policies. This is a kind of land grabbing based on food, feed, forest, climate change project, biofuel, mining infrastructure, etc. We need right to land, Article 17 of UN Road. Right to land needs to be protected and upheld if we want to transform our world. And for us peasants, this is the key for the production of healthy and nutritious food. We'd also like to take your attention in further a commitment to maintain and implement the UNDROP in public policies in your country in order to improve the livelihood of peasants and other people working in rural area. We secure land and other basic rights such as seeds, water, and access to market. We will feed the people and build our movements to change the world. Mobilize hope, mobilize struggle, can reform now, peasant right now.
So now we are moving again here in person. We have with us for the last speaker in this setting the scene, Mr. Danilo Tanel Carranza, who is the Secretary General of Catarunga, one of the key rural social movements struggling for rural poor people land rights in the Philippines. So let's hear from you what you are facing.
Thank you for the invitation to be part of this important side event. As a peasant movement, Katarungan is honored to be in this very timely and important discussion. Land is a finite resource and its utilization should serve the highest and just societal purpose possibly, especially in the era of climate change. Lived experiences of peasants clearly show that without control of the lands they till, it is difficult to survive and to live a life with dignity. Peasants compete with the most powerful forces in society, such as landlords, corporate owners, and even government agencies working with landlords and big claimants who want to control the land mainly for market and profit-driven initiatives, which involve converting agriculturally productive lands into commercial, industrial, tourism, residential, or the setting up of special economic zones. In the Philippines, the struggle for redistributive agrarian reform is a continuing process. A major turning point, a product of decades of struggle for land, was the 1987 Constitution, which recognized the rights of the tillers to own directly or collectively the lands they till. The law created to implement the constitutional mandate, however, was full of loopholes. It allowed individual and corporate landowners to evade or delay the implementation of agrarian reform, such that despite the existence of a relatively progressive agrarian reform law, land grabbing continues and is further exacerbated by climate change and natural disasters. Landlords and corporations resisted agrarian reform intensely. As a consequence, peasants claiming land rights are usually subjected to various forms of repressions, including killings and assassinations, forcible evictions, ejectment that attack their right to housing, and criminalization that attack their basic freedoms. Clearly, the right to land is linked to other rights that rural citizens must have guaranteed enjoyment. The right to land, therefore, is a difficult struggle for peasants. Despite these difficulties, we have had some modest successes in land redistribution. Over the last 10 years, our organization struggled for the successful distribution of close to 14,000 hectares of land to around 8,000 previously landless farmers. Redistribution of land, however, without the necessary support for farmers to make the land more productive, can only lead to bankruptcy of farmers and the reconsolidation of reform lands in the hands of new owners through various formal and informal land transactions. This difficult struggle for redistributive agrarian reform requires a strong mass movement of peasants with the capacity for protracted struggle for the recognition of land rights. The guarantee of the exercise of basic rights and freedoms to organization and mobilization for demand making helps in asserting peasants' rights. Peasants therefore need to be free from violence and criminalization to be able to pursue and assert their rights more effectively and peacefully. And the states that cannot stop violence against peasants should be made to account for human rights violations. In this regard, we see the need to inform our national human rights institution on the discourse on the rights to food and nutrition of peasants, including the UN draft as part of human rights that need to be complied with by the states. It is also important that there are national laws that recognize the right to peasants for redistributive reforms. The UN draft can be an important international instrument that should inform state laws and policies in fully recognizing the rights of peasants. In conclusion, we need a transformative redistributive agrarian reform to facilitate systems-wide agroecological transition and not just very localized project-based agroecological alternatives, or a land reform process that starts and ends with land redistribution but without agroecological transformation. Land in the hands of farmers and used primarily to feed the world through ecologically sustainable way are what is needed in this era of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. So moving on with the agenda, we'll now turn to the other panelists who have joined us today to and hear their reactions and comments on the presentations that were made. We will also hear from them how they see the interconnection between land inequality, land concentration, and climate change. So we will start with Ms. Geneviève Savigny, the chair of the, I'm looking because they're not sitting in the way I had prepared we had discussed. So Ms. Geneviève Savigny is the chair of the UN Working Group on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas. So let's hear from you your perspectives for realizing the right to land and natural resources.
Your Excellencies, everybody, good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting us. So you must know that this UNDROP is a working group on the rights of peasants and other people working in rural area is a new working group. It's been set up in April, last April, and it has started to work just in May. So it's and I've been nominated as a provisional chair for, since we haven't had our session yet, and I've been nominated as the chair of this working group, as the only peasant in this group, and as a symbol also, this group has been developed after the will of many peasants and people working in rural area to defend their rights. And after several years, the UNDROP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, has been adopted at the at the UN General Assembly. And after a resolution last autumn, now we have a working group. And it is very, very important for all peasants and people working in rural area to have this tool, this instrument, to be able to face all the struggles that have been described in the previous statements. The right to land is developed in the UNDROP, as we call it, in several parts. The first, the definition of peasants itself describes the relationship of peasants with the land. As the peasant, I will not read everything, but is described as a person with a special dependency and attention to the land, which defines this relationship with the very intense dependence on the land to survive, just to survive. And it also highlights the responsibility that peasants feel as regards to the natural resources that they depend on. Then the right to land is further described, especially in the Article 17. And right from the very first paragraph, the right to land is linked to sustainability. So this is to highlight how the right to land is also linked to the responsibility that we feel as regards the sustainability of the system. And it is said, the right to land is said to the right to have access to sustainably use and manage land and water bodies, coastal waters, fisheries, pastures, and forests. Further, it is the natural commons are described, and it is said that the state shall take measures for the conservation and sustainable use of land and other resources, including through agroecology, and ensure conditions for the regeneration of biological and other natural capacity and cycle. I will insist a little on this question of agroecology, as it is described as a way to work more with nature, to develop farming and within the boundaries, the planetary boundaries, and to include more the necessity to preserve the land. Because the land has got two aspects. You have the land, the area that you need to have farming, to develop farming and other food production. But it is also the quality of soil that is really important as regards the incorporation of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas emissions that can be also compensated by the incorporation of organic matter on the manure. And this is also a way to offset the emissions of our economic system more in general. The term of regeneration is also very important in this article, as you've heard probably of regenerative agriculture, which is claimed not only by small-scale peasants, but also by some companies who would like to also claim that they are sustainable when their sustainability can be questioned. The Article 18 is also very important, as the right to conservation and protection of the environment and the productive capacity of the land and of the resources. And this can be a basis to enforce environment laws in the policies which each country needs to develop. I will not develop much further two other important articles, which is the Articles 20 to the biological diversity for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and the protection of traditional knowledge. And Article 21, which is about the right to clean water system and to clean water. So all those articles describe the way that peasants and other people working in rural areas are willing to engage in farming for food production, but also for protection of environment. We probably need still evidence, and with our working group, we are developing our methods of work, we are developing our program, and it's too early to say exactly how we are going to do it. But it is certain that the right to land and how to articulate right to land and the development of peasant farming will be at the core of the work in the coming months and coming years. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the forward of looking at the work of this new working group. I think now we have also with the panel with us, as I mentioned earlier, His Excellency Ambassador Gustavo Galón, the permanent representative of Colombia to the United Nations here in Geneva. And we have heard already earlier, Excellency, that your government has announced that its intention to eventually host a second international conference on agrarian reform and rural development in 2026. And you will also be hosting, as mentioned, the UN Biodiversity Conference later this year. So, Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you to Fian, and especially to Ana Maria Suarez and to Sofia Monsalve for inviting me to be with you. And I say hello to all of you this afternoon. Historically, land distribution in Colombia has been among the most unequal in the world, having negative impacts on the social fabric and productivity. According to the report of the Colombian Truth Commission, issued 2 years ago in 2022, the land index Gini in Colombia is 0.92, 0.92, while in Europe is 0.57, in Africa 0.56, in Asia 0.55, and in the whole Latin America 0.79, 0.92. For this reason, the first point of the peace agreement signed with the FARC-EP guerrilla in 2016 aimed to transform the distribution of land through the design of mechanisms that improve agricultural productivity and competitiveness. Colombia has been implementing the agrarian reform to achieve the goal of total peace in our country based on the access, formalization, and regularization of rural property. The comprehensive rural reform constitutes one of the pillars of the implementation of the peace agreement, under the premise of reducing the gaps between the countryside and the cities. The reform represents also a substantive transformation of the living conditions and productive activity of the Colombian countryside. To comply with this first point of the peace agreement, the comprehensive rural reform was included in our national development plan. We are having dialogues with landowners, peasant and ethnic communities and the international community as a mechanism to guarantee significant progress in the reform. For Colombia, it is important to have a broad and active participation of civil society with a focus on the economic, social, and cultural rights of the population in order to transform the distribution of land and overcome existing inequalities by promoting family and peasant agriculture. One of the most notable events has been the approval of the Legislative Act 01 of July 5, 2023. This is a constitutional amendment that recognizes peasants as subjects of special constitutional protection in Colombia, according to the UN Declaration on the Peasant Rights that had not been accepted by the authorities before. The declaration was included as part of the Colombian Constitution after a long time of rejection by the previous government. On the other hand, the Just or Fair Transition Strategy prioritizes decentralized energy generation and empowers communities to produce their own energy resources from non-conventional sources of renewable energy. The expansion of renewable energies must occur progressively in accordance with the availability of natural resources, with a commitment to protect ecosystems and safeguard protected areas. Just or fair transition addresses social conflicts and inequalities by promoting access to energy services, and also implements social and environmental safeguards for communities seeking to improve their living conditions. Therefore, in the same way as the agrarian reform for the just or fair transition to be successful, it is necessary to adopt an approach focused on the promotion and respect of human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, for providing Colombia's perspective of this matter. We'll now turn to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We are joined by Therese Arneson. The Office of the High Commissioner has extended work from the Africa. So let's hear from Therese what you have to share.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you very much for inviting OHR to this event. We're very happy to be on this panel. These really excellent representatives. I don't know what I can add. I'll talk a little bit about land and human rights and how land is the foundation for the enjoyment of many human rights. That has been the traditional approach to land. Geneviève already outlined how both UNDRIP and UNDROP has really recognized land as a human rights for the rights holders in the respective declaration. But we all depend on land in one way or another. And still, both land and other natural resources are under what we would say is unprecedented pressure. Sophia already elaborated on the financialization of land and other resources, and we would add maybe the commodification as well of these resources, which basically means that resources are treated as commodities and as assets that are used for the generation of wealth and profits rather than treated as rights. And that is what is undermining the effective enjoyment of these human rights. The triple planetary crisis is certainly adding to this pressure on land and natural resources. And as we see competition and conflict over land arise, we see loss of livelihoods, population displacements, food insecurity, and loss and damage that results from climate impacts, which again has particularly adverse impacts on livelihoods and agriculture. The realization of land-related rights is really key to addressing and overcome this crisis. It's really at the center. I don't really need to say that it's both historical and structural discrimination that is related to both land distribution and ownership that is resulting in this inequitable access to land. But it's really important that we spell out the root causes in order to address them in future policy making. And it's always those further left behind that are most impacted. So again, as mentioned, indigenous peoples, peasants and other people working in rural areas, but also women and girls. We know that women in particular have very limited access to land. About 13% of agricultural landholders are women, and this really limits their role as agents to realize human rights related to land, including the right to adequate food. As Danilo mentioned, it's really important from our point of view as a Human Rights Office to highlight intimidation and violence that is faced for everyone who is defending lands in one way or another, be it human rights defenders, be it peasants, be it indigenous peoples. This is really, really disturbing numbers that we see increasingly documented, both from our office and from civil society organizations. And here for us, it's important to stress that states have the primary responsibility to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. And this includes land-related decision-making, and it also extends to climate mitigation measures. That means that for the people that are most affected by climate change and by the mitigation measures that we also heard can have adverse impacts, really need to meaningfully participate and also to benefit from the just transition. The UN guiding principles on business and human rights are also key in this regard. Businesses have a responsibility to respect human rights, to not infringe upon human rights of others, and to address adverse human rights impacts when they are involved with that. So that again relates to land, relates to climate action. And because businesses has a particular contribution already in exacerbating biodiversity loss and climate change, they also have a key role in the decarbonization of the economy. And we think this is really important players to have on board in these discourses. We know that extractive industries, development projects, and industrial agriculture, which was already highlighted by many of you, impair people's enjoyment of their rights related to land, particularly when this contributes to land grabbing. And it was really horrifying numbers that we heard from Sophia earlier, and also land degradation, which Genevieve highlighted. The Secretary General's report on climate change and the right to food, one of its key recommendations was that conversion to agroecology would require investments in traditional and indigenous knowledge and scientific practices that are dedicated to agroecology, and that this requires a just transition for workers and security of tenure, genuine agrarian reform, and effective regulation of agribusinesses. So I think this ties together all the points that have been mentioned earlier. OHR, of course, both at the global level and in our country presences, including Colombia, work to address land inequality and to increase tenure security. In Chad, for example, OHR is working to promote the right to food in a context of local land-related conflict between farmers and herders. And throughout Latin America, including in Honduras and in Colombia, the office is working with affected communities, rights holders, peasants organizations to address conflict related to land, territories, and natural resources. And we think that by taking a human rights-based approach to climate action, to just transition, to land-related conflict, we are putting the people at the center of policy making, and that's really, really the key for sustainable action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Therese. And the last speaker we have today to discuss this interconnection between land inequality and climate change. Importance of intersectionality in the view to promote equal science and collaboration. And it has already reference to then the grabbing and related issues. So let's watch the presentation about that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elisa Morgera, and I am the UN Special Rapporteur on Climate Change and Human Rights. I'm really sorry I couldn't join you today in this really important event, and I wish to thank the organizers and the experts on the panel for their work in documenting the links between land, natural resources, and the triple planetary crisis. And in particular, their studies on land concentration, speculation, and land grabbing, as well as increasing demands for land and natural resources due to the quest for raw materials needed for the energy transition, for carbon offsets, and also for land-based conservation. In my first report to the Human Rights Council, I have been reflecting on the work that other special rapporteurs and treaty bodies have already done in clarifying state obligations on climate change and human rights, and several of those international processes have referred to the importance of land and natural resources. For instance, the Special Rapporteurs on the human right to a healthy environment and the Special Rapporteur on toxics have both emphasized the role of the conservation and restoration of land and terrestrial ecosystems for the purposes of climate mitigation. And the Committee on the Rights of the Child has indicated the need for states to take immediate action to transform agricultural practices as part of efforts to protect children's rights to a healthy environment with a particular focus on climate change. The Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights has also clarified that states must avoid mitigation policies that may lead to land grabbing, and they need to consider potential impacts on disadvantaged groups from any form of land use change induced by climate change. The Special Rapporteur on internally displaced persons has also called attention to preventing displacement associated with adverse climate change effects in enhancing mitigation efforts and adopting comprehensive mitigation action as part of rural development and land use. The UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing has also cautioned against post-disaster reconstruction efforts that may lead to the privatization of land or land grabbing. And of course, the Special Rapporteur on the human rights of indigenous peoples has called attention to the use of climate funding and how that funding allocated to projects on indigenous territories need to allocate specific resources to support indigenous peoples' own efforts to secure their land rights. I would also like to take this opportunity to emphasize the importance to consider explicitly land and water connections, and in thinking about natural resource use, consider the specific needs and human rights of small-scale fishers and other ocean-dependent communities. Taking into account, for instance, the recent guidance from the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea that has clarified state obligations at the ocean climate nexus, which have relevance also for the protection of marine resources on which many communities are dependent on. But equally, there's been guidance adopted by consensus by 196 parties under the Convention on Biological Diversity, looking at tenure questions in the context of ecosystem-based approaches to climate change mitigation and adaptation and disaster risk reduction. And finally, just at the end of this week, we will see the second small-scale fisheries summit being held at FAO in Rome. And again, the importance of access to traditional fishing grounds and also land-based activities relating to small-scale fisheries are very much affected by climate change. And I expect that climate change will be a consideration in that forum, which I will attend. I look forward to collaborating with the UN Working Group on the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas to explore further the connections between land and natural resource tenure and climate change. And I offer my collaboration and congratulations to the Colombian government, both for supporting considerations of the connections between climate change, biodiversity, tenure, and human rights, as host of the UN Biodiversity Conference, which will be held in October this year, and also for announcing the intention to host a second international conference on agrarian reform and rural development in 2026. I look forward to remaining in touch with all the experts and participants in this event and learn from your efforts to document and understand those crucial interactions.
Thank you very much. We have a short time for questions and answers following the various presentations that you have heard. And I'm running quickly because I see the clock on my computer. Anybody that would like to react on some of the experiences that were shared? If not, may I turn to Sophia for her comments on what she has heard and the way forward.
Yes, thank you very much.
Diana. No, thank you for attending the side event, and I think it is time to realize that there is not going to be climate protection or biodiversity protection if we don't tackle the land inequality issue, because there is no land left for communities to live. So in that sense, we have to interpret the commitments made in international fora that protecting the land rights, it has to be the existing land rights, but we need to redistribute land because as you see the figures, it is impossible to survive on these lands, and we need indigenous peoples and peasant communities to be stewards of our lands, our rivers, and our forests. So in that sense, I think it is an appeal to understand that redistributive policies need to be part of climate and environmental policies as well, in conjunction, of course, with the transformation of industrial agriculture towards agroecology. We have all highlighted the urgency and the importance of agroecology for this transformation of industrial agriculture. But again, we need to tackle the issue of land inequality. We see an important advancement in discussions around redistribution of wealth in the sector of taxes. And I think a complementary measure has to be to address the inequality of land as well in the context of the very important environmental biodiversity and agrarian policies. So thank you for your attention. We hope very much that this upcoming conference in Colombia will be historic because it will put together the concerns of agrarian and climate justice. Yeah, thank you very much also, Jan, for facilitating our event, and a very good afternoon to you all.
Are working with the